Hello and welcome to this week's review of My Hero Academia Vigilantes, the anime series, and this week I'm reviewing the episode titled A Sky With No Rain Left. We kick off this review, as always do with these reviews, by talking about the positives and the headline positives, the big things I'm discussing over the course of this review. I think the action sequence we got in this episode was just plain fantastic, but more on that in a moment. I liked the twist with Oboro, which was brutal but brilliant, and I liked how all of this was able to tie back into the present day. Now, just two things before we get into this review. Firstly, this is the first episode of this series, possibly the entire series as far as Vigilantes is concerned, where I've not read the equivalent manga chapters ahead of time, so I'm going into this totally off my gut reaction to the anime itself. And secondly, this is my second attempt at recording this review, because it turns out that after spending a good 20-25 minutes recording the previous one, I forgot to switch the mic. Well, I didn't forget to. I had accidentally switched the echo on my microphone on, which rendered that good 20-25 minutes of audio totally unusable. Like, I could have still used it, but it would have been horrible to listen to. So, with that said, let's get to the review itself and say that, look, in time-honoured, Hall's Variety Pack tradition, let's just address the elephant in the room here, rip off the band-aid, use whatever analogy you would like. I think this episode was fantastic, and is probably one of the best episodes of the entire series. I'm not just talking about this season of Vigilantes, I'm not talking about Vigilantes in general, I'm talking about the entire series, main series included. This was an absolute masterclass, a tour de force from almost start to finish. A brilliant episode which was as thrilling as it was emotionally engaging, as produced probably one of the best little superhero stories I've seen in a very, very long time. Whilst a lot of this is held up by some really fantastic action, I still have to say is that I think this episode is just almost masterfully engineered to be brilliant on almost every level. We'll talk about the action in just a moment, but hey, suffice it to say, for here and now, the action was top notch. But I do want to at least give credit to the comedy in this episode, because I think that was brilliantly well executed. I know that humour of all things is incredibly subjective, but one of the things that is important with episodes and stories like this is to balance that humour well, to do stuff that does not overpower the drama or distract from it, or to drag the audience from one way to another. In episodes and stories like this, which are so emotionally heavy and have such an emotional weight to them, the temptation to have a lighter moment to soften things up to help the audience along is always going to be there, and it's a good idea to have these slightly lighter moments to help audiences process heavier material. I fear that in the modern age that has resulted into people thinking we need the Joss Whedon-esque quips here, there and everywhere to do that, and this is an episode that proves that you don't need that. The humour, like I say, is give or take for some people, but it's done in a way which is light and doesn't overpower what came before it, and yet still feels thematically appropriate for this episode and for this storyline. The joke and the humour towards the end of this episode is that the big octopus squid monster guy that we saw from a few episodes ago is back, and now he's working at the Recycle Hopper's place, and they're all wanting to come together to open a cafe. Goofy and silly, but the more deeper thematic edge to this is something that is established earlier on in this season, which is the fact that people that have quirks that give them more inhuman body shapes or make them significantly larger than other human beings don't have places to be. They don't have cafes and restaurants or what have you that they can go into. They don't have access to the same kind of things other people have. And as such, they don't have places where they can meet other people that have problems like they do. They don't have means to support themselves, even just socially. So these guys have decided they're going to open their own cafe where people like that can come and just enjoy a sense of being normal and being accepted. And Eraserhead as a character, as we see in the beginning part of this storyline, and as we see in that montage, though it is somewhat self-inflicted, he is a character that does not really socialise with other people well. He might be able to have other people around him, but he struggles to connect to them. He struggles to have a place of his own, a place where he can be himself, a place where he can be at peace, and that was something that he and his friends were hoping to put together when they were going to open this big hero agency together. As we see towards the end of the episode, they ask Eraserhead in the flashback what do you want to be put into our big fancy hero agency? Because they're all, President Mike wants a soundproof room so they can really just use his power to its absolute, and Oboro wants this rooftop entranceway so they can all continue to meet up and have lunch like they were doing when they were in high school. And what does Eraserhead have? Oh, you'd think he'd want a gym or somewhere that he could practice his powers on, just a room that he could sleep in. No, he wants a cat tower. Like the cat towers that you could just get anywhere in any pet shop, so that the little kitten that they've got can come to work. And that is cute, and it is sad and tragic. So when he's hearing about these guys wanting to make it a cat cafe, as well as being a place for people like the giant characters to be at, he ends up showing to him in a different way that there are people around him that have the same kind of struggles and problems he has in their own way, and that there's a place for him amongst them, and there are people around him that do care for him in their own way. I don't think, as I'll mention later on, I think these are characters that are going to functionally replace those other characters from his past, but it at least says something to him that he has a place where he can be, where he can enjoy something resembling that little slice of the future that he had stolen from him. Now, I know that this is going to be heavy praise, but hey, I've already mentioned what I think about this episode more broadly, but hey, this is, I think, an episode that features probably the best action sequence in this entire series, not just within Vigilantes, like I say, but in this series more generally. It's something that does help to elevate this episode even further beyond just being a good episode of this series, but also a great episode in the series more generally. This is one of the best action sequences. The fight between Eraserhead and the giant toad monster is brilliant, and saying that out loud is baffling that you'd expect the giant toad monster to be the thing, the big emotional thing that Eraserhead needs to overcome, but that's where we are. And part of what makes this action sequence work is just the spectacle of it, I should say. Just the sheer spectacle of it, and the superhero action stuff, which works brilliantly, and is all brilliantly well choreographed and well animated, and has a great weight and heft to it that really makes every impact and moment of it thrilling and feel like it actually is a proper, real fight of these two characters fighting each other, and not just a bunch of laser beams and people throwing fists at each other and not really connecting. Part of this comes down to the fact we have two very different power sets going off against one another. We have Eraserhead with a power that can switch off other people's powers, and this giant toad that can absorb energy and blast it back at people. You could argue there's some thematic bridging there, given that they're able to control and nullify powers, but this is a different thing. Maybe there's something deeper there that I could talk about at a later point, maybe, but in the here and now, which purely from an action spectacle point of view, you're left with this position of the how you would have solved it. How do you overcome this? You have a character that can't really fight in close combat, fighting a giant toad monster, one that is significantly more powerful than him. And that is, adds a genuine sense of peril to all of this. And part of what makes all of this work is the emotional investment that we do have in the characters involved. Sure, we know Eraserhead is going to win by virtue of the fact that this is all a flashback, and this is all telling us stuff from his point of view. We know that he is alive by the fact that he's still stood there by Crawler whilst he's thinking back on all of this stuff. And we know he exists because of where he is in the main series. So we know he's always going to survive, but we don't know what cost this is going to have for him physically or mentally. Sure, we know that he survives and he goes on to become a great hero, but we don't know how he got there. This is why prequel stories can work, even when you have characters that are established appearing within them. It's kind of like the matter that we have with Better Call Saul versus Breaking Bad. We know that Jimmy McGill is going to survive what he's in because of the fact that he's in the main series, but we don't know what turns him from Jimmy McGill into Saul Goodman. We don't know what's going to happen to Kim Wexler because she's an original character to that storyline. So we have two areas of interest to us that keep us engaged with this, even if we know what's going to happen to one of them. with this, with Eraserhead and Oboro, we know Eraserhead is going to become Eraserhead and Mr. Izawa when he becomes a teacher, but we don't know how he gets there. And we don't know what's going to happen to Oboro. So when we have this emotional investment in, even if we know 50% of this conversation is going to survive to the end of it, we don't know what state that's going to be in, and we don't know what's going to happen to the other state of this conversation. And also the fact that makes this work is the fact that Eraserhead is not the best of the best. Sure, he has a powerful quirk, but it's a quirk that has been established in this episode and in prior episodes that at this moment in his life only works in tandem with others. He needs someone else to go in there and to fight the bad guy because he doesn't have the skill in combat to do that. And as far as being a student is concerned, he's about above average, and that's kind of it. He's falling behind in all the PR stuff that he has to learn and the just interacting with the public kind of education he has, and he's not that great in combat like I just said. Sure, the character isn't quite the everyman type as you'd expect him to be, or as almost like the episode hints that he is. I mean, he's similar to Crawler in some regards, but I think that he's a different kind of character. Eraserhead at this point is a very introverted one, so I suppose that's one that many teenagers watching this might be able to identify with more than with Crawler, but that's a different strokes of different folks things. And of course, this is a whole series of events where this character needs to prove themselves, to prove that they are more than their studies, more than their grades, more than the assessments that their teachers have given them, but they're doing it in a moment where it's truly life or death. And all the while he's doing this with the encouragement of his best friend Oboro, cheering him on to make sure that he has the self-belief to save the day. And you know, given what's happening here, and given what you know from the main series, or at least what you could put together if you've not seen it and only watching this thus far, that you know where this is going. You know what's going to happen next. That, oh, Oboro's cheering him on, but you know that in this moment he's really just clinging on to life and is using the last of his energy to jeer up and cheer his friend so that he can get the win in the end, and that when the fight is over they'll get to where he's buried up and they'll pull him out of the rubble and he'll be barely clinging on to life, and he'll have this big triumphant final farewell to Eraserhead, telling him to believe in himself, to be the kind of hero that he believes that he can be, and that you go out there and really look after those kids and be the kind of guy that I know you can be. And then they'll pass away and it'll be sad and tragic and dark and horrible. Only that isn't what happens, as we see in the episode. This isn't what happens at all. That inspiring speech that's cheering Eraserhead on is all in his head. Oboro seemingly died instantly or not that long thereafter, or at the very least was so banged up he was in a position that he couldn't give this speech, and he just passed away without knowing what was really going to happen. All the encouragement, all the cheering, it was all in Eraserhead's head. It was all stuff that he imagined, and to be fair, in hindsight, the clues are there. The gourd having this speaker built into it and being used to communicate isn't really established ahead of time, and if it is, it didn't have that much of a focus brought onto it. It didn't really have anything to suggest that this was a thing that was a common use case, common thing that he had in his arsenal. It's not something that we really know that he has. We get no shots of Oboro speaking in the rubble because he was still alive and he was still clinging on to life. You'd see him, you'd have a shot of him, even if it's obscured, even if it's in shadow, even if it's dust and darkness, of him in there talking into his microphone to cheer on Eraserhead. We don't get that. And of course, there's a simple fact that, at least as far as the Japanese audio is concerned, he doesn't sound injured. He doesn't sound like he's in pain or he's clinging on to life. He sounds like he's okay. He sounds like he's alive and well and just trapped under something. Like he's managed to fall into a hole in such a way that he's not hurt. Maybe he cuts and bruises, but he just can't get out, and so Eraserhead has to save the day. But you soon know that isn't the case because of what happens in the episode itself. But hey, you know how these episodes go, so you ignore all those clues because you know how this will end. You know that once everything's said and done, they'll pull Oboro out of the rubble and he'll give his big final speech and that'll be it. Or he'll just at the very least smile and wink at Eraserhead, telling him good job, and then pass away. You know how that will end because that's how these things always end. But that's not what happens. One of the guys that adopted Eraserhead, like they adopted that stray cat, is gone. And that person never saw Eraserhead become a hero. I mean, they didn't need to deep down because they always saw him as being capable of doing so, but they aren't there anymore. They aren't there to cheer them on. Now, Eraserhead has to figure out how he as an individual processes all of this, and how can he be a hero when he still has this self-doubt within him. I don't think that as far as his life is concerned, this was a moment that turned him into the hero that we know of, but it made him believe in himself when he realised that that cheering on was internal, that it was a part of himself cheering him on the way that Oboro would do. And that is great, that is inspiring. There is, with this entire scene, this just real bleak coldness to a lot of it all. Not with the characters themselves, but with what's happening around them. There's something really clinically procedural about all of this. How they're just moving the bodies around, how all the authority has arrived and are just doing the motions and just doing the standard actions you'd expect in a situation like this. You even get the superhero banter of, "Oh boy, I never knew a kid like you had it in you," the kind of thing you'd expect to hear that a superhero would say, but it's said in a way that feels like it's been said 100 times before by this hero in 100 different ways, from all the times a student or a member of the public has had to intervene. For Eraserhead and his friends, this is a dark, horrible day, but for the other professionals, this is, whilst a bad day, just an aspect of their life. But I don't want to go to the point where to them it's only Tuesday, because they're still going to be upset and they're still going to feel horrible about the fact they weren't there to save Oboro, but nonetheless, this is still a scenario where for them this is just part of the job, this is part of the dark reality of being a hero. And this adds the extra sense of just tragedy to it. That there is no great final speech, no great musical moment, no swelling of the music as Oboro gives a speech. There is no moment where one of the pro-heroes has his arm around Eraserhead to comfort him. Maybe that comes after this scene is done, but in the here and now for what we see, this is just the harsh reality of this cold, bitter moment. And this pivots us into what we get in the end of the episode. And forgive me for going for this almost linearly, but this gives us to that second part of this episode, or rather the final quarter of it, where I was expecting that Eraserhead would turn around to become like the new mentor figure for him. And Eraserhead doesn't seem to adopt Crawl in the way that I thought that he was going to. He might well still have interactions with him and still be friendly towards you, friendlier than he's been before, but not to the extent I thought he was going to be, at least for the moment being. But that is because ultimately this tail end of the episode isn't really about Crawler. It's about Eraserhead and him feeling out where he really is in this moment. As he goes to the recycle hoppers and he talks to them, and we meet the squid monster guy and what their plans are and adopting the kitten, it shows Eraserhead that what he had when he was a teenager, what he had with his friends, still exists out there in the world, and that this group of people in their own way want him to be part of it. I mean, not part of it to the extent that he's working there, but they even set up a little place for him, his own private table next to the washroom, next to the emergency exit, so he can go out and be a hero at a moment's notice. And whilst these guys aren't friends in the way that Midnight and Present Mike and Oboro were, they're still people that want him to be around and still trust him and like him and respect him. And it shows hit to him, even though, as we see in this montage towards the end of this episode, that when he became a pro-hero, he was isolated, and he went out of his way to isolate himself, and that his apartment is just a sleeping bag and some workout equipment, and that's about it. No pictures, no wallpaper, no paint, nothing. It's just him trying to figure out things on his own. It says to him that there is a world of people out there that like and respect you, that are going to have your back one way or another. And he realises that in that moment. Forgive me for not getting the exact quote, but towards the end of the episode, he looks up towards the sky and he remarks upon how he didn't realise the sun was shining. This is him saying that he didn't realise that there was still good in this world in the way that he thought. He didn't realise there could be kindness and happiness and camaraderie in the way that he thought that there could be. I don't think he is going to become some big friend of these people, but at the very least it says to him that there is still good in the world, and that good is wonderful. And that this is may well be the moment in his life where he started to pivot and rotate and orbit around the idea of becoming a teacher at UA, but that's something we will see in due course. To touch upon the negatives, and this isn't really an issue with the episode itself per se, but it is something I mentioned before and will be a factor in the season review depending on how this next arc goes, but it feels weird that this story arc is in the midpoint of the season, or even just like the final 3 or 4 episodes of this season, rather than being the final episode of this season. Like, just the way this is put together and it's animated and it's presented, it feels like it should be the season finale. It's, even though it has dark and creepy and sad material within it, it still ends on such an optimistic note that it would work better as the season finale. I understand why it doesn't, because it pivots the attention so much onto Eraserhead that it feels like Eraserhead's story at this point. So I understand as far as the TV show is concerned why you wouldn't do that, particularly bearing in mind that this is a series of events that I mentioned in my manga reviews where it felt as though Crawler as a character was becoming like a side character in his own life story. So going by what we see in the manga and having this being the thing that would end the season would really make that problem feel like a bigger problem. I understand why they didn't do that, but it feels like I hope that what they've got coming up next, whether this next arc will be the good ending for the season it should be, but we'll see as far as that's concerned. As far as the overview is concerned, my feelings of the episode as a whole, like I say, brilliant episode, fantastic episode. God, I hope I've not accidentally put the echo on this one again, because I don't want to record this for a 3rd time. With that said, let's get into Comment Corner. It's time for Comment Corner, reading comments from the previous video. This one comes from Big X1. This is from the episode titled Glass Sky, last week's episode. He says, or she says, I'm kind of mixed about this arc being here rather than at the end. I mean, there's something more interesting than the Sky storyline, but it's strange to have it as the closing story. Thank you for your comment, and it feels weird, like I said, that this is the mid-season like storyline and not the end one. I understand why they're not doing that. Well, I speculate as to why that is, because they don't want this season to feel too much like Crawler is a side character, but all I can say is I'll be interested to see how this one works out. That's all I'm interested to say. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, I don't know, but we'll soon see about that. With all that said and done, let me know what you all thought in the comment section down below. Whether you loved this one, whether you hated it, thank you all. Thank you all for subscribing, thank you all for liking. Thank you, and see you next time. Goodbye!
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, favourite, subscribe, click the bell, and do all the YouTubey stuff that YouTube wants you to do. Go on, it'll do me a power of good. Until next time, my friends, goodbye!